Governance is about trying to help our members of pension schemes achieve better outcomes when they retire. Now, with auto-enrolment, we've seen a lot more members going into defined contribution pension schemes in the last few years. And I think that's meaning that governance is becoming more prominent in what we have to consider. Now, you only have to look at the legislation. We've had a new code of practice in the last 2 years from the pensions regulator, and they've introduced the 31 DC quality features, and I'll come back to those later. Now, in addition to that, we've also seen contract-based schemes where they're now having to implement independent governance committees. Now, what I would say for anyone who's running an employer-based contract scheme, really, it's probably not enough just to look at the Independence Governance Committee. You should be considering your own committees as well, because the independent ones won't look at your own members. And just one final point, I think really what's happened in the last few years with auto-enrolment, it's really highlighted that things like administration can go wrong. We've had a couple of big pension providers who've struggled through auto-enrolment, and that's why governance is really important, both for trustees and for employers. I think with any new legislation, you've got to review what you do on governance, because it will impact the processes that you used in the past. So I always look at it in 4 steps. So if we consider the first 2, initially you need to refresh yourself of what your duties are. Now, if you take the pension regulator's 31 DC quality features, it's a really useful document, both for trustees and for companies who run management committees. Now, if you then consider freedom and choice in pensions against that, what you'll actually find is that the majority of the features are actually affected by the change in legislation. For example, administration, investment, risk that you need to consider, and going all the way through to the retirement process. Once you've done that, it's then step 2, and that's about understanding what your objectives are. And what you might need to do initially with something like the new legislation on pensions freedom is to actually say, right, we need some training, so to understand it better. Once you understand it, it's then considering what your objectives are. So, for example, you might say that you want to allow members to take withdrawals from their pension scheme, what we technically refer to as an uncrystallised funds pension lump sum. So that might be what you want to do, but it's whether you can actually achieve it through your scheme. There's numerous benefits of the new legislation. I think we'd all agree on that. From a member perspective, I think that the big change is the ability to manage your cash flows better when you retire. So, for example, someone who wants to go part-time, they might be able to work part-time and draw more of their pension pot. So, allows them to stay in work and leave, say, other bits of pension till later. People who've got defined benefit schemes who don't want to draw them early because of early retirement factors, if they've got a DC pension pot, that might allow them to go early. So there's lots of different ways that members can benefit. When we start to look at the risk, really then it comes down to 2 different aspects. If you think from a member perspective, the risk that they're going to have to consider is, first of all, if they do take all the money out of the pension pot, what will they live on later? And it's been interesting that the DWP announced last week that actually members need to be careful because they'll not necessarily get all the benefits from the DWP if they do take all the benefits in one go. And there's risks like, what should the members be invested in pre-retirement? What should they be invested in post-retirement? And then finally, if we think about the employer's got to consider if these members can take the benefits when they want, how do they manage their workforce and their needs within their business? They could have a lot more people retiring early or even staying on work later because they've no money. And another thing for the employer to consider, in the example I gave where somebody might want to take a withdrawal, they might have to actually move their pension into another contract. that could result in the member not being in a qualifying scheme. So for auto-enrolment, there's implications as well. So once we've understood what our objectives are, step 3 then is about understanding what are we allowed to do. So just because it's in the legislation doesn't mean that we can actually go ahead and do it. It depends what our pension provider will allow. So the review that we would do would be looking at permissions from the provider, it'll be looking at the investment side of things. So for example, on the investments, you may want to offer a certain type of default strategy. However, your provider might not allow that. So you then got to consider what you would do. The final step, step 4, is about how you fulfill your requirements. So this might be things like better communication to members, explaining to them about pensions freedom. It might be changing your process so you start to talk to members at age 50 about retirement. So you're giving them plenty of time to consider what they might need to do in terms of contributions, in terms of where they invest, for example. I think the 3 key messages are, first of all, review your processes. Make sure you've looked at the 31 quality features and you understand how the new legislation impacts those quality features. Secondly, consider the benefits and risks. There's a lot more benefits and risks out there than people first see. And finally, make sure your members understand it, because they see things in the press, it's very high level, they may not understand actually the impact. So ultimately what we're trying to achieve is a better outcome for those members, so we need to make sure they understand it.